Mr. Vladimir Zelensky. So, as you know, every year Time magazine comes out with their Person of the Year. I'm going to take these off. Comes out with their Person of the Year award, right? And Time magazine, this is a imperialist rag. We should know this by now. Time magazine had an affinity toward Nazi's Nazism back during World War II. It was a huge proponent of Churchill and the British imperialists, and it's always been essentially the equivalent of a neocon rag from the very get-go. We're not talking about some sort of transformation. You could never even have called Time magazine liberal by any stretch of the imagination at any point in its history. So Time magazine already had this very establishment bent. So it's no surprise that Vladimir Zelensky, the president, the leader of Ukraine, would get this coronation. So Zelensky has been awarded the Person of the Year for this year. And not only him, but also, as you'll see here, it's not just Mr. Zelensky. And as you see, there's a paywall, so I had to archive this. It's not just Zelensky who's the Person of the Year. It's also the spirit of Ukraine. Read about the people who represent the spirit of Ukraine. So what is Time magazine talking about? I'm not going to go over its coronation because it's absolutely sickening what they do. I'm not going to go over the whole coronation, but I wanted to just react to what exactly Time magazine is celebrating here. Because what we've seen in the last, what has it been now, 9 months of conflict with Russia through Ukraine as a proxy, this U.S. NATO-led conflict against Russia, what we've seen is Zelensky become the so-called hero of democracy for the collective West and for the United States. And that's essentially what they're celebrating here. They're trying to paint this, as they have from the very beginning, as a so-called unprovoked war. And of course, Zelensky is their, is their figurehead. And he's a very poor one at that, because we know so much about Zelensky, not just the fact that he is backed by oligarchs, that Ukraine is one of the most corrupt and privatized shock therapy economies in the world. It's a very poor country. It was poor when he came in, and it's only gotten worse since he has taken leadership, especially during this crisis. And you have seen the coverage we had here when I had Ben Norton on the show, where we covered how Zelensky opened up the New York Stock Exchange not too long ago, just a few months ago, saying Ukraine is open for business, meaning Ukraine is open for full privatization. And that's what's happened. In Ukraine, what has Zelensky done? He has privatized basically anything that was state-owned before this conflict. Now he has also gone after collective bargaining rights, eradicating those. And of course, he has basically stomped all over any opposition to his rule by instituting a form of martial law, claiming that it is like wartime privileges. So Vladimir Zelensky has been a very repressive figure, but a very friendly figure for the imperialists, for the United States, for the collective West. And that's why he is a hero. They don't say at all, right? What they won't mention is all of the crimes that Zelensky and his government has committed, not just in this conflict, because they've killed a lot of people in this conflict too, through their constant shelling of the Donbass region, of Donetsk, of Lugansk, of Kherson, of all these regions. They've killed a lot of people just in this conflict alone. But even before February 2022, Zelensky had done nothing to curb the out-and-out assault and violence against the people of the Donbass. Something that's not mentioned at all. It's a media blackout. It's a Western corporate media blackout. They don't mention the thousands upon thousands, more than 10,000 Russian-speaking people in Donbass who were killed by Ukraine's security forces, Ukraine's military, which has a lot of neo-Nazi, just out-and-out Nazi forces and far-right forces embedded in its military and political infrastructure, right? You have whole street names in in localities across Ukraine, but especially in and around Kiev, named after people like Stepan Bandera. This is the society that Zelensky oversees. And of course, Time Magazine is willing to overlook all of that because now this award, right? I've gotten a lot of flack for saying, well, Vladimir Zelensky joins people like George W. Bush, like Donald Trump, like Barack Obama, like Winston Churchill, like Adolf Hitler, right? All of these imperialists and these fascists who have been coronated, who have been celebrated by Time Magazine as the person of the year, he joins them. And some will say, well, what about Martin Luther King? What about Gandhi? What about, we're always accused of whataboutism, right? But now everyone has a whataboutism when it comes to Zelensky. Oh, what about Putin? Because in 2007, Putin was celebrated. Well, let me just make a comment. Time Magazine would be an incredibly stupid institution, a ridiculous. It already is a reactionary institution, but it would be out and out foolish to just celebrate oligarchs, fascists, and imperialists. So, of course, people like Martin Luther King and Gandhi, they're co-opted and celebrated momentarily when it's convenient for the establishment to do so, when it makes them look good. But of course, the vast majority of forces are either milquetoast establishment figures or out and out imperialists who are celebrated with this award. So where does Zelensky fall? We have to be precise. If we're going to be analysts, if we're going to be activists, if we're going to be Marxists, or if we're going to be geopolitical experts or anything like that, we have to just be precise. So we have to take Zelensky for who he is. Zelensky is not Martin Luther King. I'm not a Mahatma Gandhi expert. But I know that Zelensky is surely not Martin Luther King Jr., who was against war and who would never advocate for a political leader, let alone activists, be armed and funded by the very imperialists that he opposed, the United States and its allies in Vietnam. He would never do that. So if Zelensky is not Martin Luther King, well, who is he closer to? Well, of course, he's closer to the forces that are basically bankrolling his entire political legitimacy. His entire legitimacy rests on imperialists, on the collective West, on the United States, to brand him in the way that he's been branded as this so-called democratic leader opposing the unprovoked, quote unquote, war that Russia is waging. His entire existence depends on this. So he is closer to them because he has carried out their agenda. That's the fact of the matter. So if Zelensky has carried out the collective West and the United States and NATO's agenda, then I don't think it's incorrect to say, well, congratulations, Vladimir Zelensky, for winning an award and putting you in the same vein as people like Trump, Obama, Bush, Adolf Hitler, etc. I'm sorry, but Ukraine has far-right forces, neo-Nazis, all of that inside of its government, inside of the military. So, and it's not even a secret. It's an open just fact that's just normalized now because, oh, it's not that many, even though you see them all the time. And, they got pounded in Mariupol by Russia. This is what we're sold by institutions like Time Magazine, which is really just carrying water for NATO and trying to rebrand Zelensky in a time where things aren't going so well for Ukraine, for the United States and NATO-led project. They're not going so well in this proxy war because, well, there is a lot going on that spells basically danger for the entire project. You even have Joe Biden, you have generals, you have all sorts of forces now saying, maybe we got to talk. You just saw the exchange between the United States and Russia. Brittany Griner now back in the United States for Mr. Boot, this so-called arms dealer. There was an exchange. And we all thought, oh, well, they can't talk to each other. The United States says it would never talk to the Russian government. And here they're talking. And now the United States, Biden is hinting at maybe negotiations while at the same time escalating all along the way. So you have this very contradictory policy because the US and NATO are living in a contradiction right now. They're living in an out and out quagmire. They have one time not on their side. Winter is here and Russia's offensive is coming. It should be happening in the next month or so, at least beginning, where you'll have hundreds of thousands of Russian troops beginning their operations. You already have Russia conducting these missile campaigns, which are very effective in destroying Ukraine's infrastructure to the point where Ukraine doesn't really have an energy system that's workable right now. It is a very dire situation, and that's only going to get worse the more and more that Russia, steadily escalates and allows winter to do what it does, especially to the EU and the United States, which are facing an economic crisis. The Europe is basically already in an economic crisis. Sorry for all the noise, everyone. This is the hood. So you're hearing sirens. Apologies. Can't do anything about that. Distracting for me. But Ukraine is in this terrible situation. Now the EU is basically in an economic crisis. Prices are just incredibly high. They can't replace the Russian energy that they've sanctioned off of the map for themselves. They've cut off their own source of energy, and Europe doesn't really have any solutions. They're going to try to just float by, but it's likely not going to work, and the situation is going to get very bad, and it already is very bad. It's going to get worse as the days get colder and colder. So this is really a very sticky situation. Not only this, the United States and NATO, especially NATO, is out of weapons. So Ukraine is now wants so much more support, but NATO doesn't really have the ability to give it right now. It's run out of artillery, it's run out of weaponry, and so who knows what's going to happen. But what I do know is that this coronation of Zelensky is nothing but a public relations stunt in an attempt to save a leader, a political leader who's really a puppet, is really to save his legitimacy in the eyes of the public opinion of the collective West, of the United States in particular. And nobody reads Time magazine, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But it is important to note that, Zelensky being person of the year is really all about the broader propaganda war against Russia and painting this proxy war, painting this very dangerous proxy war that threatens to spill out into a hot war between Russia and NATO. It's to paint this war as legitimate, as justified, and as something that should continue indefinitely. There's a real conflict going on right now internally within the elite forces that control the United States and NATO. There are forces that do believe that things need to cool down, and they need to cool down as soon as possible. And then there are forces, especially the military industrial complex, which believe, no, we need to secure all that we can and then build out from there. We need to secure all the contracts. We need to secure all of the military aid deals, and then we will build more. Then we will arm Ukraine more, and then we will fight more. We will allow Ukraine to fight to the last Ukrainian. We don't care about how many people die. We don't care about nuclear conflict. We just outsource all of that to the political servants, to those to that political class in the collective West in the United States that's willing to carry our water. The military-industrial complex wants to see this continue, wants to push it forward, wants to even escalate it, wants it to get worse. And so, you have these conflicting forces. You even have generals. You have people like Mark Milley who are saying, well, maybe we need to at least talk, right? And then you have the State Department in the United States basically controlled by neocons. You have, the undersecretary, Miss Victoria Nuland, essentially just a neocon war hawk who is to the right of the Pentagon, because the Pentagon does understand when weapons are flowing out and there's not enough to bolster Ukraine to the point where it's effective, well, the Pentagon understands that that's not feasible. That's not something that's sustainable. And so while I don't believe the United States is interested in peace to any extent, I don't believe 1 second that the United States is interested in peace or the Pentagon is interested in peace. I do think that they understand that this war has to look different. It has to have ebbs and flows, but we know that certain forces like the military industrial complex, like the neocons in institutions like the State Department, but also in the Pentagon and of course, all across that NATO alliance, they want to see this be pushed to the maximum effect. And they don't want any kind of curtailment of this because, in some respect, they know that if there is a pullback, it may never get back to the point where it once was. Do you know what I'm saying? These forces, the ruling class, they understand that history is always in motion. If we don't understand that, they definitely do. And they know if there's any significant change in this conflict to the benefit of Russia and to any degree when it comes to diplomacy, that this thing may never get back to where it is now. And that means a lot of lost profits in the future. So that's all I wanted to say about Zelensky.